All right, UFC Kansas City full card predictions. Prates versus Garry. We'll start with the early prelims, and we'll go on to the main card. So yeah, a couple good fights, a couple not so good fights. I'm gonna make a quick work out of the not so good fights. Speaking of, first fight of the card, Joselyne Edwards versus Chelsea Chandler. Chelsea Chandler really isn't that good. I don't think Joselyne Edwards is some great prospect, some future champion, some even. I don't think she's going to be ranked in the future, but I think she's just better than Chelsea Chandler. Chelsea Chandler known obviously for turning around and sprinting full speed into the cage against Norma Jamont, and Joselyne Edwards known for, being Leon Edwards' sister. She also has a win over Tamiris Vidal, who's known for getting punched in the boob and quitting, like thinking that was an illegal strike and quitting. So I'm going to pick Joselyne Edwards. Maybe she won't win, but I just think Chelsea Chandler isn't that good. I thought she was decent when she beat Joselyne Muniz, but we found out Joselyne Muniz isn't all that. All right, next fight up the card. This one was hard to pick for me. Timmy Cuamba versus Roberto Romero. Roberto Romero, before he was in the UFC, wasn't very good. Or before his only fight in the UFC, which was against David Onama, a short notice fight. He had a decent win over a guy, Takahiro Ashida, but all of his fights before that was against fighters with pretty weak resumes. Like before that fight, a year and 4 months ago, he fought Patrick Lehane, who was 5-2 or was 5-2 at the time. And he lost that fight. And when he got signed to the UFC for his last fight, his short notice fight against David Onama. It was up a weight class, but they're both 45ers, so just like a catch weight at 155. And he looked pretty impressive. He dropped Onama in the first round and then made it pretty competitive in the second and third. He lost a unanimous decision 30-27 on all judges' scorecards, which I disagree with. I think he definitely should have won the first round because of the knockdown. But the thing about Onama is he kind of lets people into fights by just making them brawls and trading in the pocket. And I think if it weren't for that, if he fought someone a similar ranking to Onama, just like right outside the rankings at 145, I don't think he would have had as good of a performance. So I think that was a bit of a deceiving performance. I think Timmy Cuamba is actually UFC level. Both these guys are pretty young, 26 and 25 respectively. So I think they both could have improved after their more recent fights. It's just Timmy Cuamba's been in the UFC for longer. This is, I think, his third UFC fight. And he fought Balaji and Lucas Almeida, who are two decent guys. And I think just having those fights on your resume, having two UFC camps, that you've been through, whereas this is Romero's first UFC camp, I think that is going to have him improved. And I think he'll win this one just by being more experienced. He has less fights on his resume, but more experience at a higher level, and probably, more UFC level. Next fight up the card, Jaqueline Amorim versus Polyana Viana. Polyana Viana is bad at fighting, and Jaqueline Amorim isn't that bad. She also Sam Hughes, but Sam Hughes beaten a couple prospects recently. She beat Stefan Luciano, who was a decent prospect. She beat Victoria Dudikova, who was a decent prospect. And then Jaqueline Amorim, since other than that fight, she's undefeated. She's 9-1 in her career. She's got decent wins over Demopoulos, Corey McKenna, and Montserrat Ruiz, all three of those by finish. And she's a pretty decent grappler, and Polyana Viana is not a very good grappler. She got pretty handily out-grappled by Jillian Robertson and Yasmin Lucindo in her last two, and I don't think Yasmin Lucindo is all that good. So because of that, I think that Amorim is just going to out-grapple her and win decision, maybe get a finish, but it's women's MMA, so probably not. Next fight up the card. This is the first fight I actually took notes for, like the one that's actually interesting me. It's Cameron Saaiman versus Malcolm Wellmaker. Malcolm Wellmaker, undefeated prospect, 8-0, making his UFC debut against a guy who was in a similar position a couple of years ago. 9-2 Cameron Saaiman, coming off of two losses against two, decent fighters. Like Christian Rodriguez, he's had some pretty good performances recently. Peyton Talbot had a really bad performance in his last fight, but looked unstoppable before then. And what I find interesting is Cameron Saaiman is, in any way you look at it, he's kind of the veteran of this fight. If this is a veteran versus a newcomer fight, this is his sixth UFC fight against Wellmaker's first UFC fight. But Saaiman is 6 years younger. And because of that, I think I'm just going to pick him. One thing about Cameron Saaiman is he has a lot of He's very good physical attributes. He's similar to Duplessis, who he trains with. That he's got like really good physical attributes for, survival and for doing good well into a fight. He was really, really hard to finish for Peyton Talbot, even though he got hit with like half a dozen clean strikes, a couple of those like big knees. You can argue that the finish that he got finished by was an early stoppage. He got knocked on a couple times, but he never got put out. And I know Wellmaker's a good finisher, and that's what a lot of people are betting on, is that, Saaiman got finished by Talbot, and Wellmaker is a really good finisher. But it is 135. You don't always want to bet on a guy who's got to finish you to beat you. In the 2 times he's been to a decision, they were both really close against not very good fighters. He went to a majority decision win over 11-7 Taylor Moore, and a split decision win over 2-1 Zakaria Kamara. Not the best look, and I just think that the experience and the physical attributes that Saaiman has will lend him to not getting finished by Malcolm Wellmaker, surviving into the later rounds, and just being probably the better overall fighter. He's a little smaller, and he has been finished before, but I don't think it's a good idea to bet on 135ers to finish people, especially if they don't finish people, they're barely winning against not very good opponents. So Wellmaker's also not out of a very good promotion. He was in NFC, which is kind of legit, in his last regional fight, if you exclude the Contender Series. But before then, he was in Conflict MMA, B2 Fighting Series, Icon, which is kind of a decent promotion. But he's never fought, Cameron Simon was at what's it called? EFC, which is I think a more legit promotion, and he was there from his debut to the Contender Series. So I just think he's probably more proven, more experienced at a higher level, and I don't want to bet on a Wellmaker getting a finish when I don't think he's that good of a fighter outside of his finishing potential. Next fight up the card, Damon Blackshear versus Alateng, Eli Alateng, how you pronounce his name. I'm going to pick Damon Blackshear. He's a pretty big favorite. I just think he's a better grappler than Eli Alateng. He's a pretty, how you pronounce his name, is a pretty good, he's a pretty well-rounded fighter, and he's decent. He's fine. Only losing to pretty solid opponents, but he's only beating pretty weak opponents. And Damon Blackshear is pretty good as of recent. He's been active. I don't think that Eli Alateng he's got the finishing potential to finish Blackshear however he wants, and I think that Blackshear is above the quality of opponent that is taking Eli Alateng to decisions and winning. So if worse fighters are going to take him to decision and win, I think that Blackshear can do that, and I also think that Blackshear has really good finishing potential on the ground if the fight stays there for the length of it. So I'm going to pick him. I see that 95% of people are picking Blackshear. I don't know how many of those people watched Blackshear's last fight. He looked really bad in the first round against Cody Gibson. Couldn't get the grappling going. Was getting outworked on the feet by a 40-year-old Cody Gibson. He ended up getting the submission late in the second, but until then he didn't look the best. And I think he looked like a better fighter, but he didn't, I think, perform to his abilities. And I think it's possible he does that again and loses. I just think that he's the better fighter, and it's safer to pick the better fighter than to pick the worst fighter, where there's not like some serious, massive matchup that's would cause you to pick otherwise. All right, next fight on the card, Chris Gutierrez versus John Castaneda. I think I've picked this fight 3 times. It got canceled a couple times before. I'm gonna stay picking John Castaneda. I know he was sick, and that's why he pulled out of the previous fight. I just still think he's a better fighter. I don't think a day of the fight illness isn't necessarily going to hinder you going forward in your career. He's also younger than Gutierrez, so if someone's improved, I think it's probably him since their original booking. I think Gutierrez is just a little overrated. I don't think he's had that impressive a performance against any really good opponent, other than his finish over Frankie Edgar, who was well past his prime, well-aged. And it was also small for the division, which is shocking because Frankie Edgar was the lightweight champion, and this was at 135. Chris Gutierrez, I'm pretty sure he missed weight. It says in Tapology he weighed in at 136. I don't know how accurate that is. I think, let me check. I mean, regardless, I'm still going to pick Castaneda. I just want to see if that's true. I don't have the weight information on Tapology yet. I'm pretty sure he missed weight. So I'm going to pick Castaneda. Anytime Chris Gutierrez has fought someone in their prime who's experienced. He hasn't had that good of a performance. He went to a draw with Cody Durden. He lost to Jaime Barcelos. He lost to Pedro Munoz. He lost to Song Yadong. He had a close fight with Geraldo de Freitas. A close fight with Felipe Colares. And he had a close fight with Kwang Lee, who just had a very unimpressive performance at UFC Macau, where he got, outstruck, outworked for 2 rounds and then finished in the third. Yeah, not a very good age performance. 85% of people are picking Gutierrez, even though the odds are even. I think they're a little deceived just because Gutierrez has been in main events recently. He's fought some bigger name opponents. He kind of loses those fights whenever he fights someone decent. So I'm going to pick Castaneda, probably to win a decision. I think his style of being on the outside and making the fight kind of a boring kickboxing match is a good way to bring Gutierrez to a decision, or a good way to make him make mistakes, because if you watch his fight with Song Yadong, he's a little lacking in discipline. He got in an argument with someone in the crowd during the fight while he was getting 49-46. So I'm going to pick Castaneda. Next fight up the card, didn't do a ton of research for this fight, short notice replacement. It was supposed to be Evan Elder versus Ahmad Hassanzadeh, but for good reason, Ahmad Hassanzadeh is no longer on this card. You can look into that if you will. You can look into the fact that he's teammates with Monster Evlov, if you will. Yeah, Evan Elder, I'm just going to pick him. He looks like a similar quality. I'm sorry, he's looked pretty decent in the UFC so far, not the best. He had the Dr. stoppage loss to Nazim Sadikov, who I think is a pretty solid fighter. The loss to Preston Parsons hasn't aged super well, but I think Preston Parsons is at least, the lower tier of UFC level. And Gage Young hasn't really fought anyone UFC level other than Quillan Salkild, who he lost to. Yeah, I'm going to pick Evan Elder in this fight just because he's a UFC level opponent who didn't take this fight on short notice. And Gage Young, we don't know if he's UFC level, and he did take this fight on short notice. I can see him getting a finish, an exciting, shot into relevancy, but I think that's less than likely. So I'm going to pick Evan Elder. Next fight up the card, Matt Schnell versus Jimmy Flick. I'm going to pick Matt Schnell. I think he's the better fighter. Obviously, he's very chinny. Obviously, he's just, retired after his last fight, and he's coming back. He's got a couple losses in a row. I just don't think Jimmy Flick is that good. His only win as of late in the last 4 years is against Malcolm Gordon, who, got cut from the UFC pretty recently. I thought Jimmy Flick also got cut, but I guess not. Matt Schnell's a pretty decent fighter. He's just very chinny. Doesn't have the best physical attributes. It's weird. He's chinny, but he's hard to finish if you can't put him out. And I don't know if Jimmy Flick has the ability to put him out cold, which I guess he probably does, because anyone has the ability to put Matt Schnell out cold. But if you watch the Sumadarji fight, Sumadarji landed a bunch of, potentially fight-ending strikes and couldn't finish Matt Schnell. And I think Sumadarji has better finishing potential than Matt Schnell. So because of that, I'm going to pick Schnell to just survive, make the fight a grappling match. I know Jimmy Flick is a good submission grappler. I just think that Schnell's probably got the better MMA grappling and the better wrestling. And I think he's probably just a better fighter. So I'm going to pick him and just hope he doesn't get chinned. I don't know why he's such a massive favorite when he has such a huge flaw in his game. But he's probably the better fighter, so I'm going to go ahead and pick him. Next fight up the card. Actually, let me check. Has Jimmy Flick ever knocked someone out? No. Jimmy Flick has 0 KOs or TKOs on his record, except for the 6 times he lost by KO and TKO. So I'm going to pick Matt Schnell. I don't think Jimmy Flick's going to, make square circles and knock out Matt Schnell. So, with how ridiculous that sounds. Speaking of knockout, next fight up the card, Ikram. On the main card, we've got Ikram Aliskerov versus Andre Muniz. I'm going to pick Ikram Aliskerov by first round finish, maybe by knockout. I just think he's actually good at fighting, and Andre Muniz is from that era of middleweight where they weren't very good at fighting, which was 3 years ago when everyone in middleweight was dog shit and was losing to people you were shocked they could lose to. The only guy who really came out of that era of middleweight, and there's a couple, but it's Strickland and Duplessis, and I guess Brendan Allen came out kind of decent. All of those guys looked horrible in those 3 years of fighting, and then those are the ones that came out and you're okay, they look horrible, but they're actually kind of decent. Andre Muniz is in the camp where he's a good grappler, but he's not a very good fighter. And Ikram Aliskerov, other than losing to Robert Whitaker and Hamza Chimaev, if he's not fighting a top 5 guy who's going to throw uppercuts, he's won every fight in his career. So Yeah, I'm going to pick Aliskerov by early finish. I just think he is the much better fighter. So yeah, next fight up the card. Randy Brown versus Nicolas Dalby. This one could be exciting, could be boring too. Dalby has had a lot of his most recent wins, and his performance over Renat Frekretnov can be in this camp too, by taking advantage of fighters who are unproven with no cardio or heart. Mainly his last two performances, I would say. You got Gabriel Bonfim, who's undefeated, huge favorite coming in that fight. Just took a couple hits to the body and quit. And then Renat Frekretnov won that fight by robbery decision. But he got out cardioed by Dalby, who did look the best in that fight, but just used the clinch and like body shots and stuff to slow him down and get an advantage. I don't think Randy Brown is that unproven. I think he's actually a pretty decent fighter. I think he's got a style to beat Nicolas Dalby. You look at Nicolas Dalby when he's fighting good, experienced fighters. Split decision to Worley Alves, who's not very good. He beat Colby Covington, I'm pretty sure, but he's not a very good fighter. He had a unanimous decision loss to Tim Means, pretty bad look, and he got choked out by Jesse Ronson. I know Jesse Ronson had that fight overturned by, I'm pretty sure he failed the drug test, or let's see, check. But yeah, all of those performances are not very good. So I'm not exactly thinking he's going to beat anyone that's good and experienced. Yeah, Ronson choked him out in the first round, then failed the drug test. He tested positive for metandinone or dianone. I don't know what that is. I'm guessing that's a steroid of some sort. So yeah, I think Brown has looked pretty good and improved since the JDM fight. Looked decent against Wellington Turman. Had a really good knockout against Muslim Salikov, who Nicolas Dalby didn't look very impressive against. Had a pretty decent fight with Leslie Zaleski. His grappling didn't look great in that fight, but other than that, on the feet, on the outside, he looked pretty solid. And then I think he beat Brian Battle, who was an up-and-coming prospect, and then he kind of got robbed, even though Brian Battle didn't do very much. So I'm going to pick Brown to win this fight, probably by decision, maybe like a flash knockout, but I think Dalby's good enough to not get finished. I just think he's much smaller, much older, a little bit more washed, and maybe not as technical as Randy Brown. And Randy Brown doesn't have those holes that Dalby's been taking advantage of to have his good performances recently. All right, next fight up the card. This is my fight of the night pick. Michel Pereira, however you say his name, versus Abus Magomedov. A lot of people are picking Michel Pereira. I don't know if I agree. Actually, I don't agree. I'm going to pick Abus. And the reason why is because obviously they both have a very similar style towards the beginning of the fight, where they're super explosive, super dangerous, but they taper off really quickly. They both don't have very good cardio, but they have insane finishing potential in the first round. And I think that, you might say, well, Abus is a lot bigger, so, how is that advantage going to work in the first round? I would also say he's a lot chinnier. So in that first round, I think that it's a pretty even matchup. I think both can finish each other very well. And that was kind of the similar story in Abus Magomedov's last fight against Bruno Ferreira. It's like, this is a very dangerous guy in the first round, both of them, the taper off. And Abus won that fight by just taking it patiently, using the size in the beginning. And then as the fight went on, when Ferreira lost his explosiveness, he just out-grappled him and beat him. He did get dropped in the second, and I think he is still pretty chinny, but he hasn't been finished in 6.5 years. And Pereira just had one of the worst cardio performances in the UFC, in my memory. I mean, maybe other than like the Shamil Gaziev Rosenstrike fight, and that was probably the worst performance of his career. And I think that Abus can have a similar performance that he did to Bruno Ferreira against Michel Pereira. He could just take it slow at the beginning, and then once Pereira loses that explosiveness, loses that danger, he could use his advantages in technique to beat him. I can also see Pereira using his low fight IQ to end up on bottom, or do something stupid, get DQ'd like he did against Diego Sanchez, like he arguably should have against Igor Poitier. I think he had another. Did he have one of those against someone else too? I don't know. He likes to throw kicks around opponents a lot, which can get him in trouble. So I think Abus will probably win this fight if it goes beyond the first round, and I think it's like a 50-50 if it stays in the first. So I'm going to pick Abus to win. Next fight up the card. Another arguably fight of the night pick. It's got Giga Chikadze versus David Onama. I just prefer Onama as a fighter, so I'm going to pick him. I honestly don't know why he's a favorite. because I want him to win, I kind of reverse engineered a reasoning for that. So here's my best attempt at reasoning why Onama won this fight. I wrote, anytime someone is willing to trade with Chikadze, they have pretty decent success. You look at the Edson Barboza fight in round 2, Barboza upped the volume, and he started to get an advantage. Jamal Emmers used a lot of volume in their fight, and he made it close. It was a split decision. I think round 2 was the 50-50 round. You look at the Calvin Kattar fight, Calvin Kattar just kept the volume, kept beating up Chikadze with jabs and combinations, and Chikadze got whooped in that fight. Arnold Allen fought on the outside, which I wouldn't suggest anyone to do against Chikadze, who's a pretty good kickboxer, but he had his most success when he kind of came in, trading hooks in the pocket. He would get the better of the exchanges when he was trading. And I don't expect Onama to do that, but I do expect that if Onama wants to trade, he will have success. And Onama always wants to trade, almost to a fault, like we were talking about before with the Roberto Romero fight. He almost got finished in the first round just because he was willing to trade with a guy who he probably had a technical advantage over, and a guy who has a technical disadvantage arguably. He'll probably want to make it more of a 50-50 in the striking, especially when you consider he has a much better finishing potential, and I think he's probably harder to finish than Chikadze is. I think Onama is also explosive in the grappling, so I think that if the fight goes to the grappling, if Onama can take it there, which Chikadze hasn't really had to deal with yet in the UFC, he can have success. And I also think he's pretty hard to finish when he's gassed. If you look at the Nate Landwehr fight, he got dropped really bad in the third round of that fight when he was completely gassed. And this is in an era where I think it was James Krause said that he wasn't really showing up to camp. He wasn't taking the fight super seriously. And he still was really hard to finish later in that fight. If you want to just look at his resume, he's got 2 losses in his career, and both of them have aged pretty well. He lost to Mason Jones, who only has 2 losses in his career. Mason Jones's 2 losses are to Ludovic Klein, who, that loss has aged pretty well, and he lost a robbery to Mike Davis, who at the time was a pretty solid fighter. And then obviously, like I said before, Onama's other loss is to Nate Landwehr. So he's not losing to like schlups. I don't think Chikadze is a schlup, but I do think that, I don't think Onama's like way outside of the rankings just because those are the guys he's had wins over so far. Yeah, so, every time Chikadze fights, I got to mention this. If you look at his record, I think it was in his 7th or his 8th fight, he had a 12-second armbar finish over CJ Baines. If you look at CJ Baines's resume, he is 2-33. Actually, he's 2-35 because 2 of his losses don't count because they were found to be rigged fights. He's definitely stat padding like a... Chikadze definitely fought this guy. He probably paid to fight him because CJ Baines likes to lose fights. A guy who's 2-33. Chikadze also has a win over a 0-13 guy who's 0-13 at the time, retired 0-14 after their fight. So if you look in the Gladiator Challenge, they have a couple of those guys who are just paid to lose. Another win over a 1-10 guy. All of these first round finishes, by the way, in the first minute. So, Chikadze's 15-4 record, not the best look. Next fight of the card, co-main event. This one might be really sad. Anthony Smith versus Mingyang Zhang. We don't know how good Mingyang Zhang is. All of his wins have come in the first round. Anytime he's left the first round, he's lost. But I was looking at his resume and I was like, that's not a very good look. But if you look at how he started his career, he's 26 right now. He's born in 1998. He made his pro MMA debut in 2014, which would have made him 16, 15 at the time. A lot of his early fights, a lot of his losses came when he was under 20 years old. His last loss when he was 21. He's on a 11-fight win streak. All of those first-round finishes. And Anthony Smith, not exactly in the best run of his career. He got that win over Vitor Petrino. You can argue it was a fluke. You can argue that Vitor Petrino was never that good. And other than that, he looked really bad against Roman Dolidze, and he looked very, very bad against Dominic Reyes. And he went into the fetal position, grabbed 2-on-1 wrist control, and kind of gave up. And he got there against Dominic Reyes by getting hurt on the feet late in the first round, and then not wanting to get hurt on the feet in the second round. And I'm afraid that if he gets hurt on the feet in the first round against Mingyang Zhang, he's not going to see the second round. So I'm going to pick him to lose. He could win. He could outlast Mingyang Zhang. Mingyang Zhang might have no cardio after the first. I would just be surprised if this great finisher can't finish this guy who looks like he kind of wants to get finished in half of his fights. So I'm going to pick Mingyang Zhang. Main event. To avoid spending too much time on this fight, I wrote like a script of what I wanted to say, so I'm just going to go ahead and read that. So here we go. Carlos Prates versus Ian Garry. I'm picking Carlos Prates. Here are the reasons why. Ian Garry had a really close fight with Jeff Neal that he only won because he had the size advantage against him, and Neal was also really hesitant to throw and still made it a close decision. If you want to talk about the hesitancy, I don't think Prates will have that hesitancy because of his fights against all of his fights in the UFC, actually. If you look at the Magny and Radke fight, from the jump, Prates was walking both of them down. Anytime they were in striking exchanges, he was getting the better of them, not hesitating, cutting off the cage, making them, do whatever they could to get away from him. And then if the fight starts off like a lot of Ian Garry's fights, do, especially the fight against Jeff Neal, where it's tit for tat on the outside and Ian Garry's getting the advantage, which is kind of how the Li Jingliang and Trevin Giles fight started out for Prates. After he kind of got their timing down, he walked both of them down and finished both of them. So if it goes that way, I think he'll have the advantage still. Ian Garry also had a really close fight with MVP where he got significantly outstruck on the feet because he had a significant reach disadvantage and MVP refused to enter striking range on Ian Garry's terms. So the reason why Garry had success against Jeff Neal was because every exchange was on his terms. He was the one backing up. They only had exchanges when, Jeff Neal wasn't really cutting off the cage, so anytime Ian Garry wanted to throw, Jeff Neal was kind of going to be there, but anytime Jeff Neal wanted to throw, Ian Garry wasn't going to be there. Prates has a very similar, I think he has a similar level of striking to MVP where he's going to have the advantage. He also has a reach advantage over Ian Garry. And I also think that Prates has a better pace, a better ability to cut off the ring and, engage in exchanges. And therefore a better finishing potential over a guy like Ian Garry. Ian Garry got outstruck on the feet against Shavkat when Shavkat isn't much of a technical striker, just because Shavkat didn't have a huge size disadvantage and didn't always go into exchanges on Garry's terms. Similar to MVP, he was hesitant, but he wasn't hesitant like Jeff Neal, where he just would get hit and then hesitate. Shavkat and MVP would always throw first because they don't have that reach disadvantage. And I think Prates is more technical and puts on a much higher pace than Shavkat. Maybe not than Shavkat generally, but definitely than Shavkat did in his last two. If you look at Ian Garry's last, 3 fights against Shavkat, MVP, and Jeff Neal, you could say, he makes fighters really hesitant. But if you actually look at it, Shavkat fought really hesitant against Wonderboy too. MVP is always really hesitant, and Jeff Neal was really hesitant because he has the size disadvantage. So I don't think Gary's going to make Prates hesitant in the way that he made, or in the way that those other 3 were. I don't necessarily think that was just because Ian Garry's really dangerous and really technical, so people are afraid to strike with him. Ian Garry also had very little success against Neil Magny outside of landing a lot of outside low kicks. If you look at the success that they both had against Neil Magny, Prates fought him in a 5-round fight and finished him in the first, and Ian Garry looked pretty good, but most of his success was just being able to low kick at will, and Magny was checking no leg kicks, and Ian Garry hasn't had that success against anyone else. And I don't think he's going to have that success against Prates, who's got a background in Muay Thai and has pretty low kicks himself. Prates can have a lot of success in the hand fight, for he had a lot of success with it against Radke, and Radke has a pretty short reach, and Ian Garry also has a pretty short reach for his height. Prates has a left hand that he throws really fast and overthrows, which could hurt Garry, who backs out from exchanges very irresponsibly. If you saw the Song Kanan fight, he was in an exchange with Song Kanan, tried to just swing his head back, and kind of like how Volk does and how Volk got caught against Topuria and Islam. And Song Kanan threw a left hook, but he kind of overthrew it and threw it kind of like an overhand. And it landed clean and almost finished Garry. And if you look at this left hand that Prates threw in his Contender Series fight, the one that he landed on Jingliang like 5 times, the one that landed on Charles Radke out of the hand fight right before the knee landed that finished Radke, and the one that finished Eduardo Ramon on the regional scene, I feel like that's going to land perfectly on Ian Garry if he times it correctly. Just the way Ian Garry backs out, he's backing up or right into the path of that left hand, and I feel like he doesn't do that because that's like a thing that Ian Garry strategizes for his fights. I feel like he does that because it's a bad habit. Ian Garry also got caught by Shavkat. Probably the strike that landed the hardest in their fight was a punch that Shavkat landed when Ian Garry backed out like that. When Prates hurts people, he chases them down and finishes them. You look at Magny, you look at Jinglang, you look at Radke. He dropped Magny, chasing down and finished him. Dropped Jinglang a couple times, I think once in the first and then a couple times in the second. Went on to finish him. And then Radke hurt him with the left hand, kept the wrist control, and landed the knee to finish him. He also immediately disengages from the grappling when he needs to. So sometimes he'll hurt a guy, think about going into the grappling to finish him, and then disengages if he doesn't think it's going to be there. And then whenever Magny took him down, or when attempted to take him down, or whenever he reversed Magny's takedown, he disengaged immediately and kept the fight on his terms on the feet. Prates is also willing to go shin to shin, which will allow him to land good low kicks. I'm kind of saying that because I feel like Ian Garry is the kind of guy that would really not like getting shin to shin low kicked, but also because I just think that people have struggled to have success against Ian Garry before, and I think he's tactical enough to check low kicks. But if Prates is willing to go shin to shin, him checking low kicks isn't going to take him very far. Prates might have. This is the main thing people are picking for Garry. He looked really good in the clinch versus Shavkat. He looked pretty good in the grappling late in their fight. He looked good in the grappling against MVP. And that's how he won that fight. But I think Prates might have a grappling disadvantage, obviously. But I think his takedown defenses look good enough in the UFC so far. He hasn't really been taken down at will. He's been able to limp leg, get against the cage, do shit like that to get out of takedowns. And then he also has the Fighting Nerds grappling plot armor, where none of them have really been out-grappled that successfully. Yeah. I mean, obviously I'm saying plot armor kind of sarcastically. I think what it actually is all of the people in that gym that are like the four main guys, Barao, Prates, Houfi, and what's his name? Gene Silva. They all have really good striking, so they all probably prioritize training grappling with each other because they don't need to improve their striking that much. And if obviously people thought that the grappling was going to be a big disadvantage for Gene Silva against Bryce Mitchell, but he neutralized it pretty well and made the grappling in his terms and kept the fight on the feet when he wanted to, and ended up getting a finish from hurting Bryce Mitchell on the feet and finishing him with a submission. And I think that Prates can have, maybe not finish him with a submission, but have similar success in the feet and similar success neutralizing the grappling. So yeah, I'm going to pick Prates for that. I'm also picking Prates because I prefer him as a fighter. I've been trying to do that more recently, especially because of what happened at UFC 314. If you listen to my predictions for that, I went undefeated. I went undefeated except for one fight. I think I went 12-1 or 13-1, however many fights were on that card. The only fight I got wrong was Dominic Reyes versus Nikita Krylov, which I originally picked Reyes for because I preferred him as a fighter and I wanted him to win it. I'm like, let's be reasonable. Let's just pick the guy who I think is better. So you'll notice a couple of times in this fight, or on this card, I'm picking Onama because I prefer him as a fighter. I'm picking Abus because I kind of prefer him. I'm picking Prates because I kind of prefer him. And if this has success in this card, maybe I'll do it more going forward. Yeah, those are my predictions. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Thank you for listening. Like the video, share the video, comment. Again, if you agree or disagree, if you want to hear more about a pick. If you want to hear about my previous predictions, those are up. Going back for the whole year. That is all. Yeah, thank you for listening.